Currently, artificially produced tetrahydrocannabinol THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana, if you get it as a pill, it's in Schedule 3 already. So it's an anomaly that cannabis is in Schedule 1, and yet the active ingredient is in Schedule 3. So yes, Schedule 3 is probably the right place at this moment.
Welcome to High Five with Dr. Igor Grant, Distinguished Professor of Psychiatry and Director of the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at UC San Diego. Each episode will take you on a fascinating journey into the evolving world of medicinal cannabis, as Dr. Grant poses 5 thought-provoking questions to his guests, uncovering their personal journey and unique contributions to the field. In this episode, we deviate slightly from our normal format to bring you a conversation with Dr. Grant about the potential implications of rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. I'm Dr. Jamie Corroon. I'm a project scientist at the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at UC San Diego. Today, I'm here with Dr. Igor Grant, the director of the CMCR, to have a conversation about the potential rescheduling of cannabis. Welcome, Dr. Grant.
Thank you, Dr. Corroon.
So let's just start out with, currently cannabis is scheduled as a Schedule 1 controlled substance. There's talk that it may be rescheduled to Schedule 3. What are these schedules, and what is a Schedule 1 controlled substance?
Yeah, the schedule is really just a grouping of drugs based on their habit-forming potential and also whether they are medically useful or not. So, for example, a Schedule 5 drug, which would be the least habit-forming, would be drugs that have, some habit-forming potential, but not very much. And then Schedule 1 and 2 are drugs with strong habit-forming addiction potential. The difference between Schedule 1 and 2 is that in Schedule 1, these are drugs with no currently accepted medical use. And cannabis is sitting there.
And what do you think is moving this conversation that's motivating the change from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3?
Well, I think in the past 2 to 3 decades, there's just been increasing research to show that cannabis does have some medicinal value. And so that's, I think, one aspect. The other is, I think, there's a lot of research to suggest that, yes, cannabis can be habit-forming, and like any drug, it could affect your health negatively, but it's not a very toxic drug. So it's not that dangerous, and it does seem to have some value.
So it has an accepted medical value and some potential for abuse. Do you think that Schedule 3 is the right place for it?
Well, probably, although I think based on its real toxic potential, it might even belong in Schedule 4. But these are nuances. Currently, artificially produced tetrahydrocannabinol THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana, if you get it as a pill, it's in Schedule 3 already. So it's an anomaly that cannabis is in Schedule 1, and yet the active ingredient is in Schedule 3. So yes, Schedule 3 is probably the right place at this moment.
And you, as part of your work, are investigating cannabis in clinical trials. What are the challenges for researchers in this country who are trying to do this work with cannabis as a Schedule 1 controlled substance, and how will that change if it's moved to Schedule 3?
Yeah, when a substance is in Schedule 1, first of all, you have to convince the Food and Drug Administration that you're doing a project that is safe and has some potential to show us something useful. FDA requires standards of manufacture to make sure that things don't have, for example, toxic chemicals in them, that there's purity and so forth. So that's one aspect. And that's hard with a plant product. The other aspect is in Schedule 1, there are very strict rules about who can do the research. So a physician has to have, for example, a Schedule 1 license, a special license. And secondly, there are a lot of controls on how this substance moves, called chain of custody. So who is the next person receiving it? How is it stored? How is it disposed of? Are the facilities set up in such a way that there isn't diversion and so forth? So there are a lot of challenges when it's in Schedule 1. Schedule 3 drug, on the other hand, would be like doing research on, say, an anabolic steroid or low doses of codeine. It's got acceptable uses. Yes, there are some storage issues, but they're not onerous the way it is with a Schedule 1 drug. So it'll be much easier to do the research.
So you mentioned FDA approval, and you mentioned a license. That license is a DEA license?
FDA issues what's called an investigational new drug, or IND, certificate. And basically, the FDA reviews, first of all, why is the study being done? Is there some reasonableness to it? And secondly, are the products being administered to people? Have they been shown to be, for example, through animal studies, as not toxic or not so toxic that you shouldn't do the work? And thirdly, as I mentioned before, the manufacturing has to be certified to certain standards.
And what is the role of the DEA in all of this?
Well, the DEA, again, looks primarily at the issue of diversion, because these are controlled substances. So as I said before, in a Schedule 1, you need a special license. Schedule 3, the physician or whoever's doing the protocol still needs to have DEA registration, but it would be like your physician who is prescribing you, as I say, codeine. So it would be that kind of registration, which most physicians have.
So if cannabis is moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, will that open up the cannabis products that are available for researchers to use in their work?
Not necessarily. First of all, until a few years ago, the only supply of cannabis that was allowed for human research was from the NIDA program. However, in the last few years, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, has approved several more manufacturers of cannabis products for research purposes. So in theory, there will be more products available. Problem has been that the NIDA program, for example, hasn't necessarily had lozenges or other ways of administration that people commonly use. They had marijuana cigarettes. Now they're expanding that. But the new manufacturers could do that. The problem with the new manufacturers is they're not required to produce placebo, which is, if you will, the dummy drug that you need to have in any clinical trial. Otherwise, you don't know whether your drug is actually working.
And so it's important to have the manufacturer of your study drug also manufacturing the placebo so that they're as identical as possible?
Yeah, correct. The other thing, though, about Schedule 3 is more maybe psychological, which is, it could be that more physicians and universities and so forth will now say, oh, well, they've recognized that cannabis has some medical value, so it's not a useless, dangerous thing. And, they're not going to come after us and withdraw all of our federal funds, for doing this terrible thing. So it may encourage people to do the research based on that.
Yeah. Do you think it will increase research funding in addition to reducing the stigma?
I don't know that the rescheduling will have any particular effect on funding, say, from the federal government. The federal government has steadily increased funding for cannabis research. I think those of us in the field feel it's not enough, and it's not necessarily dedicated heavily to medicinal cannabis. There's a lot of other work on mechanisms and things like this. But I don't think it'll have any significant effect.
Does this move to Schedule 3, does it allow researchers to investigate cannabis products that are being sold in dispensaries in states with medical and adult use regulations?
No. And you've identified, one of the oddities of the USA, which is that about half of the country lives in states that have now actually legalized marijuana, and many others have at least recognized medical marijuana. And yet the federal government still says it's a Schedule 1 substance. Now, if it moves to Schedule 3, it's still a controlled substance. So you and I can't go to a dispensary in California where there are legal sources of cannabis and take them and administer them in a clinical trial. It would still be illegal.
So it doesn't do anything to resolve this conflict between the federal government and the states.
No, it does not.
What are some of the challenges of procuring cannabis products for research studies as a Schedule 1 controlled substance that may change if it's reclassified to a Schedule 3 controlled substance?
I don't know that the rescheduling will change very much in terms of the supply itself. Currently, the most accepted source is the National Institute on Drug Abuse's drug supply program, which is at the University of Mississippi. That provides marijuana products for researchers. The DEA has also, in the last few years, approved additional manufacturers of cannabis products. I think the problems in the NIDA program have been just the variety and availability of the types of preparations that people are actually using in states where they're legal. So, for example, you might be supplying marijuana plant products for smoking or inhalation, but the composition of how much THC is in there, how much CBD or some combination, has been difficult to standardize. So for a while, NIDA was not supplying plant cannabis itself with the required concentrations of THC because on the street, THC has gone up to maybe 20, 30%, whereas the upper limit in NIDA was maybe 12 or 15%, but it's going up. So that's just an example. The other is the type of product itself. So people are increasingly using gummies. They may be dabbing or vaping and doing things like this. And in order to really understand how marijuana is affecting people's health, we need to study these modes of administration. It's been difficult, I think, to standardize that. And also, importantly, to have placebo, which is if you give somebody a gummy, then there's got to be a dummy gummy, if you will, so that you can compare the effects of what's in the gummy versus in something that looks like it.
And right now, through the NIDA drug supply program, the University of Mississippi is cultivating and manufacturing these cannabis products for use in research. Do they have the ability to manufacture products that are similar to the products that consumers are using in these states with medical and adult use regulation?
I think they're gradually moving in that direction, but with any one source, there are always limitations just in terms of amount of funding available, staff available, the expertise to manufacture these different kinds of products. So yes, I think it's moving in that direction. And some of the other drug suppliers that I mentioned that the DEA has approved may be able to do that. But I will emphasize the placebo problem, that at least for people who are doing research, they need to compare what you think works to what you know shouldn't work.
Yeah, and I think you answered this question, but just to be clear, it sounds like the products that people are currently using in these states won't be eligible to be used in clinical studies if cannabis is rescheduled from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Is that right?
That's correct, because even in Schedule 3, it's still a controlled substance, and you need federal approval, and the feds are not going to approve it. Forget even the DEA for a minute, but the Food and Drug Administration is going to want to know, how was this manufactured? Are there standards of purity, quality control to make sure that you're not giving people something that has, say, toxic chemicals in it?
So as a professional researcher, does this go far enough if it were to be rescheduled to Schedule 3 to make your life easier? Or asked differently, if you had a wish list, what would you wish for to be able to use cannabis in clinical trials in a way that was easy and seamless and safe?
Well, Schedule 3 definitely makes it easier in two ways. One, it recognizes that cannabis has some medicinal value. So it's not this useless, dangerous thing that is sitting in the same neighborhood as heroin or LSD and such. So that's very important because that also encourages people to do research. It's not so verboten anymore. So that makes it easier. I think when we talked about all the storage requirements and other kinds of things that the DEA is part of, that makes it easier. But it doesn't make it easier to study the products people are really using. And so that remains a significant issue.
And what do you think we would need in order to study those products?
Well, we need a harmonization of state and federal law. Now, in Canada, they have legalized cannabis, but they also have a medicinal cannabis law within that, which then allows, for example, physicians actually to prescribe cannabis, and also it facilitates research. So in Canada, they chose at the federal level to legalize it, but then it's allowed the medicinal research to proceed in a more coherent manner.
Any closing thoughts on this topic?
Yes, I think that it would be important to somehow, even under Schedule 3, have a system whereby the federal government can acknowledge the need for research by, creating some accommodations to researchers being able to access state legal products. And also that might require at the Food and Drug Administration level, again, some accommodation to recognize that plant products cannot be brought to the same exact standard as a chemically produced product. That doesn't mean anyone should condone unsafe things, but I think we know from a lot of history of just general cannabis use over the centuries that it's unlikely to be horribly dangerous. And so maybe there's some way to accommodate that reality.
Great. Well, Dr. Grant, thank you for your time.
Welcome.
If you liked this podcast, please subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. For more information on the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research at UC San Diego, please find us on social media at CMCR_UCSD on Twitter or X, Instagram, and other social media platforms. Or visit our website at cmcr.ucsd.edu. Thanks for listening.